Here is my base pattern already cut out and placed somewhat like the final piece of armor will be. This was made by wrapping my client in aluminum foil, then layering duct tape over that. Then I drew on the duct tape to give me my basic shapes. I cut those shapes out to make what you see here. The next step is to flatten out all the pieces of the base pattern. Some of the pieces have too much curve to flatten properly and still serve as a workable pattern. On the shoulder pieces, I'm going to have to cut a small wedge out. This wedge will allow the leather I'm making this out of to curve like it should when it comes time to give this armor its shape. Here is the upper part of the pauldron, also known as the shoulder plate. I'm cutting the wedge out of it to allow it to lie flat while still producing a piece of leather that can curve around its wearer's shoulder. I don't show it here, but I end up doing the same thing to the lower shoulder piece as well. Once this is done, the base pattern is ready to transfer onto paper to make the actual pattern. Here I'm kind of trying to give you an idea of how it will come together and produce a curve, although the base pattern's a little flimsy to really show you exactly how to look in leather. Now I have laid out the base pattern on heavy brown paper. I'm using a marker to trace around the upper shoulder part. After I finish tracing the upper shoulder, I mark the paper pattern so I don't get it confused with any of the other parts of the pattern. Once that is done, I repeat the process for all the other parts of the pattern. When that is done, I'm ready to cut out the paper pattern. In the last part, I had said the paper pattern was ready to cut. I was wrong. I forgot about adding the overlap. The base pattern was drawn accounting for only the visible parts of the armor. So I have to add a little to the tops of the lower three pieces to allow for the parts that are overlapped by the pieces above them. I have decided that 1 inch should be plenty. If it's too much, I can always trim a little off. To add the extra inch, I draw a string of dots, 1 inch from the top of the piece, and then I connect the dots. Once I have the overlap done, I label it. I was riding sideways here, and that P was giving me fits. It's time to cut out my paper pattern. I place my dense foam mat under the pattern to protect my table. I'll be using an X-Acto knife to cut out my paper pattern. Having a sharp blade is important. A dull blade might tear the paper instead of cutting it. I'm extending my cuts beyond the length of my marks. This makes sure my cuts meet in the corners like they're supposed to. repeat the process on the other 4 parts of the pattern. Now we get to the good part, the leather. First, we must check the front of the leather for any ugly spots. No piece of leather is perfect. There's always a few wrinkles or some discoloration. Be mindful of this when you are planning where to cut your pattern from. Once you have a good spot picked out to cut from, turn the leather over. If you leave stray marks on the backside, no one's going to see them. The focus was giving me some trouble here, but it clears up soon. By the way, the leather I'm using for this project is 7 to 9 ounce single shoulder Vegetan. When tracing your pattern onto the leather, be sure not to let the pattern slip. If you notice that it has, line it back up using the first corner you drew. Be sure when drawing your pattern to include the little wedge you cut out of the base pattern. This is also known as a dart. It is important to make sure that it makes it onto the final cut of the leather because it will not bend and curve properly without it. Because I'm drawing on the back side of the leather, left and right are reversed. Remember this when you're labeling your pieces. Now to make the mirror image of the first piece I drew, I'm flipping the pattern over before I trace around it. See how I take great care to make sure that the pattern does not slip. is also important to make sure that the pattern does not buckle or bow up. Your marker can slide under the edge of the pattern if it does this and give you a false mark. After I labeled these, I realized that I had forgotten about the writing on the backside reversing left and right, and had labeled them all backwards. That's okay though, because I labeled everything that was supposed to be on the right left and everything that was supposed to be on the left right. So as groups, they're together properly, and I can easily figure out which is supposed to be right and left before I finish the project. Here's the whole pattern for both shoulders drawn out on the back side of the leather. Before I start cutting, I place my dense foam mat under the leather and make sure that none of the piece I'm cutting is hanging over the edge. I'm going to be using a utility knife with a new blade to do the cutting. The sharper the blade, the cleaner and easier the cut. So change your blade if it starts to dull. I start each cut by pressing the sharp tip through the leather. Just like when I was cutting out the paper pattern, my cut is longer than the mark I'm following. This makes sure that all my cuts meet at the corners. When cutting thick leather like this, even with a sharp blade, you must bear down quite hard. Going around bends or curves in a cut can be challenging. It is important to do your best to keep your blade at a 90-degree angle to the surface of the leather. This helps ensure a nice, clean, flat cut. Sometimes, with thick leather like this, the cut doesn't make it all the way through. When this happens, just lay everything out flat again and recut the line. Here is the boundary line marking the overlap. From here down will be the part of the armor that will show. A above that line will be underneath the next piece. Finally, here are both pieces of armor cut out. The top two parts of both sides will be shaped into curves and attached to one another to make a pair of pauldrons. The dart I cut out will help achieve this complex shape. I'll have more D&D costuming and LARP videos soon. Please remember to subscribe, like, and share. Thank you for watching.